I should have known that a job offering $60 an hour for simple data entry was a trap. But when you are 3 months behind on rent and the eviction notice is taped to your front door, your common sense starts to fade away into desperation. I found the listing on a specialized recruitment board that required a Tor browser to access, which the poster claimed was necessary because the company dealt with high-level sensitive corporate intelligence that couldn't risk being intercepted by competitors. The website was professional, minimalist, and sleek, featuring testimonials from anonymous employees who praised the firm for its privacy and its massive payouts. I sent my resume into the digital void, not expecting a reply, but within 20 minutes, my encrypted inbox pinged with a message that sent a surge of adrenaline through my chest. The interview wasn't going to be over Zoom or in a glass office downtown. Instead, I was instructed to meet a hiring coordinator at a specific industrial complex on the outskirts of the city at 11 o'clock at night. The message explained that the graveyard shift was the only time their secure servers were taken offline for maintenance, allowing them to bring in new recruits without risking a data breach. It sounded like tech bro paranoia, but in the world of high-stakes corporate espionage, I figured that being overly cautious was just part of the culture. I drove my beat-up sedan through the pouring rain, watching the city lights flicker and disappear in my rearview mirror as I entered the desolate warehouse district. The GPS led me to a massive, windowless concrete structure that looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint since the late 90s. There were no signs, no logos, and only a single flickering halogen light above a heavy steel door that stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for me. I stepped inside and the heavy scent of ozone and stagnant air hit me instantly, making my lungs feel tight as the door clicked shut behind me with a finality that made my hair stand on end. The lobby was empty, furnished only with a single plastic chair and a tablet bolted to a metal stand. As I approached, the screen glowed to life, displaying my full name and a set of instructions that told me to leave my phone, my keys, and my wallet in a small locker built into the wall. The tablet informed me that the firm required total digital silence to ensure that no GPS signals or recording devices could compromise the location of their primary server farm. My gut told me to turn around and run, but then a notification popped up on the screen showing a digital receipt for a $500 signing bonus that had supposedly just been deposited into my crypto wallet. The greed won over the fear, and I placed my belongings in the locker, hearing the electronic lock engage with a sharp, mechanical thud. A hidden door in the wood-paneled wall slid open, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch on forever into the darkness. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor, feeling like I was walking deeper into the throat of some great, concrete beast. There were no cameras visible, yet I felt 1,000 eyes on me, a sensation of being watched that was so intense it made my skin itch under my clothes. I reached the end of the hall and found a small office with a single desk, a glowing monitor, and a man sitting in the shadows who didn't look like a hiring coordinator. He was wearing a tactical headset and a gray windbreaker, his face obscured by the high collar and the way the monitor's blue light cast deep, distorted shadows across his features. He didn't greet me or ask for a handshake. He simply pointed to the chair across from him and told me to sit down in a voice that was as cold and mechanical as a pre-recorded message. "The work is simple," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the screen in front of him. "You will see strings of data appearing on this secondary monitor, and your only job is to categorize them into active or expired based on the timestamps provided." I looked at the screen and saw a list of names, addresses, and what looked like bank account balances. But as I scrolled down, I realized the names weren't random. I saw the names of local politicians, business owners, and even a few people I recognized from my own neighborhood. This wasn't corporate intelligence. This was a massive, organized database of targets for identity theft or something much worse. As I began to type, trying to keep my hands from shaking, I noticed a small window in the corner of my screen that showed a live map of the building we were in. There were several red dots moving through the corridors, and one blue dot that represented the room I was currently sitting in. I realized with a jolt of terror that the red dots were closing in on our location from 3 different directions. "What is this map?" I asked, my voice cracking as the silence of the room became unbearable. The man finally looked up at me, and I saw that he wasn't wearing a headset to talk to a boss. He was listening to a feed. "That's the security team," he said, a faint, predatory smile touching his lips. "They've finished scrubbing your digital footprint. As far as the world is concerned, you never left your apartment tonight, and your car was just picked up by a local scrap yard." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't here for a job. I was here because I was a clean identity with no immediate family and a pile of debt that made me the perfect candidate to disappear. They needed people to manage their dark web operations, and once you entered this building, you didn't leave until you were no longer useful. I looked back at the map and saw that the red dots were now just outside the door. I knew that if I stayed in that chair for another 10 seconds, the interview would end with me in zip ties and a blindfold. I didn't think, I just reacted. I grabbed the heavy, glass paperweight from the desk and smashed it into the side of the man's head with every bit of strength my fear-fueled muscles could muster. He slumped over the keyboard, his headset emitting a frantic burst of static and muffled commands from the people in the hallway. I bolted for the only other door in the room, a small maintenance hatch that led into the crawlspace beneath the raised floor of the server room. I crawled through the dark, the smell of dust and hot copper filling my nose, while above me, I could hear the heavy thud of combat boots hitting the floor. They were searching for me, their flashlights cutting through the gaps in the floorboards like searching fingers of light. I kept moving, following the thick bundles of fiber optic cables that I hoped would lead me to a central hub or a secondary exit. I found a vertical ladder that led up into a ventilation shaft, and I climbed it until my lungs burned, moving silently through the metal ducting as the sounds of the men below grew distant. I finally reached a vent that looked out over the back loading dock, where a single delivery truck was idling in the rain. I kicked the grate open and tumbled out, landing hard on the wet pavement, the impact sending a jolt of pain through my shoulder. I didn't stop to check for broken bones. I scrambled into the back of the truck just as the driver began to pull away, hiding behind a stack of empty crates as the vehicle cleared the perimeter fence. I stayed hidden in that truck for 3 hours until it reached a distribution center in a different state. I hopped out and ran until I found a highway patrol station, where I finally collapsed and told them everything. They raided the warehouse the next morning, but the building was completely empty. The servers gone and the walls wiped clean of any fingerprints. The signing bonus had vanished from my wallet as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me with nothing but a bruised shoulder and a paralyzing fear of any job offer that seems too good to be true. I never go back to that part of the city, and I never use the dark web anymore because I know that somewhere out there, the firm still has my resume, and they are still looking for the one that got away. The clock on my microwave shifted to 12:30 in the morning, and the heavy silence of the suburbs was broken by a sound that didn't belong in the middle of the night. It wasn't the wind or a stray cat, but the unmistakable, dull thud of something heavy being dropped onto my wooden front porch. I lived at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac where nothing ever happened, so the sound made me sit upright on my sofa, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I peered through the blinds of my living room window, but the streetlights were out again, leaving the world outside draped in a thick, suffocating velvet of shadow. At first, I saw nothing, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed a large, square box sitting directly in front of my door, wrapped in dark plastic that seemed to swallow what little light remained. I shouldn't have opened the door, but we live in an age of constant deliveries, and my first thought was that a neighbor's package had been dropped at the wrong house by mistake. I stepped onto the porch, the cold night air biting at my skin, and reached down to lift the box, but it was surprisingly heavy, feeling as though it were filled with lead or dense machinery. There was no shipping label, no return address, and no logo of any major courier service. The only thing on the exterior was a small, handwritten note taped to the top that simply said my childhood nickname, Mouse, a name that only my immediate family and a few old school friends knew. I dragged the box inside and closed the deadbolt, my hands trembling as I grabbed a kitchen knife to slice through the thick plastic wrapping. Inside the box was a layer of industrial foam, and nestled in the center was a single, cheap burner phone and a small metallic canister with a digital keypad on the lid. The second I touched the phone, the screen glowed to life with a blinding brightness that made me squint. A text message was already open on the screen, and the words made the blood in my veins turn to ice. It said, "You have 10 minutes to hide the canister in the crawl space, or the men outside will find it on you when they break the door down." My breath hitched in my throat as I realized this wasn't a mistake, but a calculated, terrifying game of life and death. I looked back at the window and saw a pair of headlights slowly turn into my driveway, the beams of light cutting through my living room like searchlights. These weren't the police or a delivery driver. The vehicle was a matte black van with no license plates, and it was moving with a predatory slowness that screamed danger. I knew about the dark web dead drop forums, where people used unsuspecting houses as temporary storage for illegal cargo to avoid being tracked by the authorities. I was being used as a human shield, a temporary warehouse for something so valuable that people were willing to kill to retrieve it. The phone buzzed in my hand again, a new message appearing. 9 minutes. They are checking the perimeter. If they find you with the canister, they will clear the witness. I felt a wave of pure, unfiltered panic wash over me, the kind of fear that makes your vision blur and your legs feel like leaden weights. I grabbed the metallic canister, which was cold to the touch and hummed with a faint, electronic vibration. I ran toward the back of my house, toward the small access hatch in the floor of the laundry room that led to the dark, damp crawl space beneath the foundation. As I knelt on the floor, frantically pulling at the rug to uncover the wooden hatch, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel outside my bedroom window. They were circling the house, looking for the easiest point of entry, and I realized that my front door wouldn't hold them back for more than a few seconds. I finally pried the hatch open, the smell of wet earth and rot rising up to meet me, and I shoved the canister into the darkest corner I could reach, burying it under a pile of old insulation and dirt. I climbed back out and flattened the rug just as the sound of glass shattering echoed through the house. They had bypassed the door and smashed the kitchen window. I didn't have time to run for the front exit, so I ducked into the pantry, pulling the slatted door shut and holding my breath until my lungs felt like they were going to burst. Through the thin gaps in the wood, I saw the beams of powerful flashlights sweeping through the hallway, the light dancing across the walls in frantic, jagged patterns. I heard their voices then, low and gravelly, speaking in a shorthand that sounded professional and rehearsed. "The drop was made 5 minutes ago," one of them whispered, his voice coming from just a few feet away in the kitchen. "The kid took it inside. Check the living room. If it's not on the table, find the kid and make him talk." I pressed my back against the pantry shelves, my eyes wide with terror as the footsteps grew louder, moving toward my hiding spot. Every floorboard that creaked under their weight sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. One of the men walked right past the pantry, his shadow momentarily blocking the light filtering through the slats. I could see the outline of a heavy tool in his hand, something meant for breaking locks or breaking bones. My heart was beating so loudly I was certain he could hear it through the wood. He stopped in front of the laundry room door, the very room where the crawlspace hatch was hidden. "The rug is moved," he shouted to his partner, and I heard the sound of them tearing the laundry room apart, throwing boxes and equipment aside in their search. I knew I had to move now or I would be trapped in the pantry like a cornered animal. While they were distracted with the noise of their own search, I slipped out of the pantry and crawled on my hands and knees toward the front door. Every inch I moved felt like an eternity, the rough carpet scraping against my skin as I tried to remain as silent as a ghost. I reached the front door and realized they had left it unlocked after they entered through the window. I grabbed my car keys from the small table by the door, my fingers fumbling with the metal ring as the men in the back of the house realized the crawl space was empty. "It's not here," one of them roared, his voice filled with a sudden violent rage. "Search the rest of the house. He's still inside." I didn't wait to hear another word. I threw the door open and sprinted for my car, the cold rain slicking the pavement and making me stumble. I dove into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life just as the two men burst out of my front door, their faces hidden behind dark tactical masks. I slammed the car into reverse and floored the accelerator, the tires screeching and smoking as I backed out of the driveway and sped away into the night. I didn't stop until I reached the bright, neon lights of a 24-hour police station 3 towns over. I sat in the lobby for an hour, my body shaking so violently I couldn't even hold a cup of water. When the police eventually searched my house, they found the shattered window and the ransacked laundry room, but the crawl space was empty. The canister was gone. The retrievers must have found it seconds after I escaped, or perhaps there was a third person I never saw. The burner phone had been wiped remotely, leaving no trace of the messages or the timer that had nearly ended my life. To this day, I don't know what was in that canister or how they knew my childhood nickname, and that is the part that keeps me awake at night. I moved across the country a month later, but every time I hear a heavy thud on my porch or see a black van idling at the end of the street, I feel that same icy chill in my chest. I realize that on the dark web, your home is never truly your own. It's just a coordinate on a map for someone else's dangerous business. I remember staring at the glowing screen of my phone at 3 in the morning, wondering if the $500 sitting in my digital wallet was actually real or just some elaborate cruel joke. The app was called Pathfinder, and I had found it on an Onion link hidden deep within a freelance gig forum on the dark web. The description was dangerously simple. Live beta testers needed for urban navigation software. High pay for high-density movement data. I was a broke college student living in a basement apartment, and the thought of making a week's rent just by walking through the city seemed like a miracle. I didn't question why the app required me to disable my phone's security protocols, or why the testing sessions only happened between midnight and 4 a.m. I just laced up my sneakers, grabbed a heavy hoodie, and stepped out into the humid night air of the city. The interface of the app was a stark, neon red map that didn't look like any GPS I had ever used. There were no street names, only a pulsing white representing me and a series of golden waypoints scattered across the industrial district. As I reached the first waypoint, a notification chirped with a sound that felt oddly sharp in the silence of the empty streets. Waypoint 1 reached.
Bonus, $50.
Proceed to waypoint 2. I felt a rush of excitement, a sense of easy victory that blinded me to the fact that the app was leading me further away from the well-lit main roads and into the maze of narrow alleyways behind the old textile mills. The further I went, the more the city seemed to transform into something hostile and unfamiliar. The streetlights here were either smashed or flickering with a dying orange glow, and the only sound was the distant hum of the power grid and the rhythmic tapping of my own heart. I reached the third waypoint, a rusted loading dock behind a chemical warehouse, when the app did something unexpected. The screen turned black for a second, then a new set of instructions appeared in a jagged, handwritten font. New objective: avoid the observers for 15 minutes to double your current payout. Below the text was a small radar sweep, and my breath caught in my throat when I saw 3 blue icons appearing at the edge of the screen, all of them moving steadily toward my pulsing white dot. At first, I thought it was just a game, a bit of added user engagement to test the app's speed. But then I heard the sound of a heavy car engine idling just around the corner of the warehouse. A black sedan with tinted windows and no headlights slowly rolled into view, its engine purring like a predator in the dark. I ducked behind a stack of wooden pallets, my phone vibrating violently in my hand. A message popped up: "The observers have visual contact. Run." This wasn't a navigation test anymore. I was the bait in some twisted, high-stakes game played by anonymous gamblers on the dark web. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that people were likely watching my movement in real time, betting on whether I could outrun the people in that car. I didn't wait to see if the sedan would speed up. I bolted toward a narrow gap between 2 brick buildings, my lungs burning as the cold air hit the back of my throat. Behind me, I heard the screech of tires and the slamming of a car door, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of someone running on the pavement. The app chirped again, but this time the voice was different, sounding distorted and layered. "Turn left into the basement stairwell. They are right behind you." I didn't have time to think about whether the app was trying to save me or lead me into a trap. I just followed the red line on the screen. I dove down a set of concrete stairs and pressed myself against a heavy iron door, my chest heaving as I tried to remain as silent as a ghost. I could hear the person above me, their footsteps slow and deliberate as they searched the entrance of the alley. "He went down here," a voice whispered, sounding terrifyingly calm, like a hunter who knew the prey had nowhere left to go. I felt a wave of nausea hit me when I realized they weren't just following the app. They were using the same GPS data I was providing to track my exact coordinates down to the inch. I looked at the phone, my thumb hovering over the power button, but a new message stopped me. "If you disconnect, the observers win. The exit is through the boiler room." 3 minutes remaining. I realized that the only way out of this nightmare was to finish the game. I pushed the iron door open, the hinges screaming in a way that made me wince, and found myself in a subterranean labyrinth of pipes and hissing steam. The heat was stifling, and the smell of grease and old rust was overwhelming. I followed the red dot on the screen, crawling over hot pipes and ducking under low-hanging beams, while the sound of the door opening behind me echoed through the basement. They were inside the building with me now, and the radar showed the blue icons closing the distance with terrifying speed. I reached a dead end, a brick wall that looked solid and final, and for a second, I felt the weight of my own mortality pressing down on me. I looked at the phone, ready to scream, when the screen flashed a bright, strobe-like white. "Look up." I looked toward the ceiling and saw a small, rusted coal chute that led toward the street level. It was narrow and filled with decades of filth, but it was my only chance. I grabbed a nearby pipe, hoisted myself up, and began to scramble through the narrow tunnel just as a flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the boiler room below. I could hear them shouting, their voices filled with a frustration that told me I was winning, but I didn't stop to celebrate. I pushed through the metal flap at the top of the chute and tumbled onto the sidewalk, the rain-slicked asphalt feeling like the most beautiful thing I had ever touched. The phone gave one final, long vibration. "Test complete. Payout processed. Delete the app now." I didn't need to be told twice. I uninstalled the software and watched as the icon vanished from my screen. Then I threw the phone into a nearby storm drain just to be safe. I ran for 3 miles until I reached a well-lit gas station, where I sat on the curb until the sun began to peek over the horizon. When I finally checked my bank account from a public computer later that day, the money was there, but it didn't feel like a victory. I had been a beta tester for a hunt, a piece of entertainment for people who hide in the shadows of the internet. I moved out of that basement apartment the next day and never walked the city streets at night again, because I know that somewhere out there, the Pathfinder app is looking for its next version, and the observers are always hungry for a new game.